floating cabin. It's been here since, I think, 1974 or something. It's boat access only, West Coast Vancouver Island, pretty remote. There's a few other floating cabins around this bay. I think it's about 6 o'clock in the morning. We'll see if we can catch a fish today. Beat up. Definitely not enough sleep. And no shortage of moving around. Working the gear and the downriggers and the big lumps out there. Sarah had a little bit of a bout of seasickness, so we cut her short for the last day, which is okay. Not too many people wouldn't have gotten sick out there, but we got a handful of fish. So while this place is still quiet, nobody's here, I'm going to share some emails. Now this is titled Baby and Mama Almas. A-L-M-A-S, that is the Russian, or these beings have been referred to in Russia as Almas. This story is translated from the original Russia circa 1960s and came to me from the former California Bigfoot webpage some years ago. That website is now defunct, but here's a story for you and your subscribers to hear. It takes place in the early 1900s in the Caucasus mountain range, located in southern Russia and northern Georgia of Eastern Europe. During early spring, there was a cold snap in the mountains in about March or so. A woodsman and trapper was living in his cabin in the forest, waiting for winter to finally break. It was unusually cold that season, with nights getting into the minus 60 C, which is in the minus 70s Fahrenheit, which is very cold indeed. That's a little ridiculous cold. The woodsman had been seeing large, barefoot prints in the snow for a few days and already suspected that an almasty, the Russian equivalent for our Sasquatch, was hanging around his camp. One night when it was unusually cold, he heard at his outer door a tremendous banging and wailing of a large animal of some sort just outside his cabin. Upon his slowly opening the door, there stood a female almas, clutching her newborn baby, blubbering and carrying on. He understood immediately that she was afraid for the baby's life and wanted to come into the warmth for the night. He led her into the wood room of the cabin where he kept the firewood and supplies, but that was warm enough for her and her kid to survive the wicked cold that night. The story doesn't say, but I'm sure he gave her something to eat as well to tide her over. Soon the weather broke and it warmed up and spring finally came, and he never saw the two of them again. I've heard recently a similar story from one of the YouTube Bigfoot storytelling channels that took place in Finland in maybe the 70s, about a park ranger befriending a female almas and her son for a few seasons while the boys grew up, only become a very large and surly fellow soon after. Yes, no act of kindness ever goes unpunished. He also never saw them again and requested a transfer to another park afterwards. They called them Pico, or Hisi, or Hisi, H-P-E-I-K-K-O, or Hisi, Hissi, H-I-S-S-Y in Finland, according to a Scandinavian website I found. The end. Thanks for the safe harbor, Jim. Jim, thanks for sharing that and passing it on, man. I'm sure out of our sleuths on this page, somebody's heard of that. I haven't. But I do know that Russia mocks North American science because of their stance on this topic. They know these beings exist in Russia. They don't try to hide it, and they haven't a clue why North America is set on being the way they are set in their ways, which is lying their asses off and blocking the truth of the people. Thanks for sending that in, man. Appreciate it. Hi, Steve. My name is Tamika. I listen to your channel here and there with my husband, who has emailed you some of his stories. So I figured since I've had a couple of experiences with Sasquatches, I wanted to share with you. I didn't really believe they existed until July 2019 when my husband and I first got together. I was driving back to my husband's place from visiting a close friend one night. I was going around a sharp corner on the road with my high beams on when I noticed someone on the side of the road crouching down and stood up as I was about to pass it. It was tall, black hair from head to toe, broad shoulders. I never got a clear look at the face, but I knew it was a Sasquatch. I put my car into second gear and blazed down the road and didn't slow down for over 2 kilometers. My second experience was December 2019. I was getting home from working night shift at the store and was on our back porch getting snow for my hands since they were red and sore from disinfecting everything at work. It was right after the flu, that shall not be named, first happened, so I made sure everything at work was sanitized. Anyways, when I was almost done getting the snow, I heard something howling from behind the mountain just behind our place. I immediately froze to listen to what I could because I never heard anything like it before and felt my eyes get super wide. Once I snapped back to reality, I threw the bowl into the snow and ran inside and darn near jumped into my husband's arms. I was so spooked. When he asked me what was wrong, I told him to howl like the Sasquatch he heard years ago. And when he did, it gave me chills because it hit the head right on the nail. And I told him that's what I heard outside. So he went outside to listen, but it stopped before he got to hear it. So now, I 110% believe they are real. Thank you for sharing my story on your channel. Alright, welcome to the club. Welcome to the club of no return. It's funny how many people need to see or hear or experience themselves to accept it, isn't it? Another member hits the club. In response, this is the next one. In response to a recent email from Kevin Schneider, Benton Harbor, Michigan. My name is David Felicia. In a recent email from Kevin Schneider, Benton Harbor, Michigan, he had an experience of something walking right by him, but he couldn't see it. And he asked if anyone else has had this similar experience. I live in southeast Michigan, in northern Macomb County. I used to hunt in Tar Hollow State Forest in southeast Ohio from 2000 to 2008. On the last hunt of one of our trips, I decided to go all the down to the bottom of the hollow and check it out. I was told the wind swirls one of the bottoms, and it's better to stay out of them and to hunt the benches and the saddles. There was so much big buck sign down there I couldn't help myself. I didn't have a tree to set up down at the bottom for my tree saddle, so I had my climber on my back. I set it up, climbed up 16 to 20 feet or so, pulled my bow up, and started my last hunt for the 10-day trip. As the evening set in and the wind settled down to almost nothing, I heard what I thought was a deer coming. Mind you, it was wide open hardwoods, and I could see at least 100 yards in every direction. There was a very thick bed of dead leaves on the forest floor. They were very loud to walk through, even for the deer. As deer 30 was approaching, I heard something coming. The footsteps were very loud and getting closer with every passing second, but it sounded like a person walking through the leaves, not a four-legged deer. I thought that for only a split second, or so, as Sasquatch was not on my radar at the time, and I was 1.5 miles from any road, so the chances of it being a person were slim. So in my head, it was now a deer. I thought for sure it was going to come into view at any second now, as the sound was now right next to my tree. Well, it didn't. I was straining to see whatever was making the noise without moving too much as to not get busted if it was a big buck. I could see the leaves moving where whatever this was walking. How insane is that? How many times have we heard that one? That's the pattern. Isn't that crazy? I could see the leaves moving where whatever this was walking, but there was nothing there to be seen. Just crunch, crunch, crunch. I didn't know what to do. I kind of was freaking out. Whatever it was kept on going, and the sound of crunching leaves got quieter and quieter until it was obviously far enough away to where I couldn't hear it anymore. The shitty thing was, it went in the same direction that I had to take to get out of there. I stayed in my stand for another half hour and finally managed up the courage to get down and get out of there before it was pitch black out. The entire walk out was the most terrifying moments of my life. I told my dad and my buddy Kenny what happened, and they just blew it off. Can't blame them, as they didn't experience it. I had one thing happen when I was around 9 years old. My Uncle Kelly and I were walking up to the gas station at the corner of Baker Road and 23 Mile Road in New Baltimore, Michigan. This is back when Baker Road was all dirt. It's now all subdivisions. Anyhow, there is a S-curve in the road because the Salt River runs next to the road. As we rounded the last part of the S-curve, and we're now in the half-mile long straightaway that would take us to the trail that cuts to the field to get to the gas station, I looked up, and crossing the road, right about where the trail to the store was, I seen 2 upright, all black, quote, people, end quote, I would say, walking left to right across Baker Road. One was tall, one was short. They spotted us and stopped in the middle of the road, spun around, and went back the way they came. Only thing was, the little one dropped to all fours and ran back as the taller one stayed up on 2 legs. This freaked me out bad. I thought my uncle was messing with me by having a couple of his friends do this to scare me, but he swore up and down that was not the case. We never made it to the store. We turned around and went back to my grandparents' house. One other time I was hunting our deer lease in the thumb of Michigan, Sinilac County. I was 22 years old, I believe. I had acorns hitting me while I was in my tree stand. They were coming at an arcing angle, like they were being thrown. Didn't think much of it till I heard everyone else's stories. I still hunt to this day, although I may wait till I can see a little before setting out. Going out early and sitting an hour in the dark isn't an option for me anymore. I'll be 50 this month. I'll be 50 this month on the 25th of March. Keep up the great work, Steve. Dave Felicia, New Baltimore, Michigan. Dave, welcome to the Club of No Return. And happy birthday, man. I guess we're late, but happy birthday. I hope it was a good one. Thanks for sharing it. Thanks for sharing it. So many. Alright, here comes a bit of a magazine. Whoa, this is a long one. What else we're going to do? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it. From Australia, 73 years of experiences and knowledge to share. Holy shit. Hi, Steve. Thank you for being who you are and providing a place for all this knowledge to be shared. I came across your channel a few years ago and have watched just about every episode. I especially take note of the likes of Mr. Ash, the ladies, and others that mind, and others of that mind. I thank them through you for their knowledge. Yeah, sorry, this is a bit of a book, mate. I've cut it down a bit, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. I've had 3 or 4 Yowie experiences in my life so far, with the first terrifying one being when I was about 7 or 8 years old, to the most recent, positive one, only 2 years ago while hiking. So here we go. In about 1958, I was 8 years old. We lived in the northern outskirts of Sydney. The bush was our backyard / play area for a lot of us kids. We didn't have a TV back then, but my aunt and uncle who lived about a mile away did. So once in a while after school, I would walk to their place, watch some kids' TV, then walk back home for dinner. This one night I ended up walking home just after dark. All was good till I was about 3 houses away from where I had to turn the corner and up the street to my home. As I got to within the 3 houses proximity, I started to be overcome with terror. The corner house had tall bushes around the fence line, so mostly obscuring seeing into the yard. Though as I was smaller, I could see in between the branches and stems. I glimpsed back in the dark what I thought was a little old man who lived there, but as I turned the corner and saw through the gate, the shape was tall, hairy, and huge in stature. My heart was pounding. I could hardly breathe. The terror I was experiencing was overwhelming. My mind was totally confused. I could not fathom that this was the little old man, but it wasn't. All I could think of was to run the 200 yards to my home, whatever it took. When I got home, I was in hysterics. Mom asked what was the matter. I explained how the little old man down at the corner house had turned into a big bear in his front yard. And she explained how I was just seeing things and go get washed up for dinner. Thought it was a bear because in those years, that was about the only big hairy thing people knew about. This popped into my mind. As kids, we all played in the bush. One of our favorite places to meet up was where a creek ran over a rock area that we called the Giant's Footstep, as it was a huge footprint in the rock. I'm trying to remember back and picture it. It must have been 18 to 24 inches long. Wow. Moving on. My next encounter was while backpacking with a mate in about 1978 or 79. We had been hiking for a few days and thought to stop and make camp. It was a broad, sandy track with dense brush either side, out of the wind. Where we decided to pitch our tents was against a small embankment about a foot high, with a couple of small trees overhead to give shelter in case it rained overnight. I was tending the fire and cooking something. I had my back to the dense bush beside the track, only about probably 5 feet behind me. I suddenly got that feeling that I was being watched, and it was intense. At first, I didn't turn around. I just tried to broaden my senses to try and feel what was around me. Then I turned around and saw that the dense bushes had a blackened oval type area that the watch feeling was coming from. When I did that, the feeling stopped. There was nothing else, no fear, no dread, etc. It just went. On dark, we turned in, thinking that this area is well known for snakes, and especially the type known as death adders. I decided not to leave my backpack on the ground, but to hitch it up to the tree next to my tent. All good, off to sleep. Then a crash next to my tent. I slept with my machete next to me, so out of the tent, torch and machete in hand. The torch is Australian for a flashlight, you guys. Torch and machete in hand to see my pack on the ground. What the F? I'd done up the waist strap around the branch so there was no chance of it falling on my tent during the night. So who and how did they undo it? I figured they were just messing with me. Around this time of my life, I was becoming very spiritually aware, and there were a lot of interesting things happening to me. Now to the most recent, October 2021, a mate and myself were hiking in the state of Queensland, an area known for yowie sightings. We're setting out for a 9-day hike through challenging terrain. The first day was about 10 miles with steep cliffs on both sides with trees and a good creek that formed into small water holes sometimes. Beautiful stuff to walk in. We came to our first camp spot. It was a ravine next to what would normally be a broad stream some 50 yards wide with smallish to big water stones that moved and made noise as you walked over them. Important later. We pitched our tents up on a level embankment about 6 feet above the stream bed. The embankment area was covered by trees, the canopy about 8 or 10 feet above us. My mate chose to pitch his tent as far away from mine as possible, lol. As on previous treks, he unkindly suggested that I snore like a sawmill, though I argued that I didn't hear anything, lol. I positioned my tent so as to get the view from my side entry right down to the stream bed and could also see the crossing and further down the draw. I was hoping the moon would be up so I could get the beautiful night scenery. The moonrise was going to be light, so I just settled back and listened to all the night birds. It was amazing. I liked the nighttime just as much as the daytime. After a short while, I became aware of voices. I thought, what the heck are people doing trekking here in the night? They must be nuts. Maybe they caught out and just pressed on. I listened more intently to the voices, at the same time looking out of my tent to the crossing. Nothing. I could make out each of the voices. They all sounded like women's voices, youngish voices. I have the ability to see sounds, so I closed my eyes and put my attention on them. A geometric shape came with 4 petals, like a flower with 4 petals, so I knew there were 4 of them. At the same time, I became aware that all the birds had stopped. I could no longer hear the breeze in the trees over my head. This continued on for what seemed a few more minutes, then the voices stopped. Then a mind-speak woman's voice said, quote, "You are interfering. You are interfering. You are interfering," end quote. But besides her words came the meaning each time, quote, "You should not be here," end quote. It was not threatening or angry, just a softly spoken statement. Instinctively, I replied in my mind speak, quote, "We are travelers. We need to rest for the night. We are leaving when the sun comes up. We will not take your food, but we will need to take some water," end quote. There was a peaceful feeling. And a moment later, I saw a white orb next to my tent door. I could have reached out and touched it. It was so close. It radiated a soft white light that only seemed to illuminate to about 3 or 4 feet around it. The orb was not just a flat, smooth surface like a light bulb, but had the similarity to the iris and pupil of a human eye. I did feel as if it was observing me, looking at me. There was no feeling of malice or threat. It was actually a comforting, friendly feeling. I just accepted it was there, meant no harm. I was bloody tired, and so laid back and went to sleep. All the while in the back of my mind was to see the moon and the stars at night. So, sometime later I woke to see the moon and stars above the steep ravine. Fantastic sight, good for the soul. Sometime later I woke up again thinking, hey, the moon's out still, isn't it? Hang on, the light was coming from under the side of the trees around me. I took a moment to gather my senses and realized that there was an orb outside at the end of my tent. The feeling I got was that it was watching over me. I did not mention any of this to my mate in the morning. You usually say here, why not? The reason being that these type of things happen so much during my life so far that they are, in a way, normal for me. Nothing out of the ordinary, just different each time. Wow. Now to part 2. I've always believed in sharing knowledge. If I learn something, it is my duty to pass it on to those who wish to hear. I've been writing a book/journal of all my experiences and knowledges to pass to my children and grandchildren. They all know I am a bit different, LOL. So they might as well see the whole story. I said earlier that I'm a spiritual person, as against being a religious one. I became disillusioned by mainstream churches, so went seeking myself, and this led me to finding more than any church could have. I'm not knocking organized religion, it's just not for me. I have a firm belief of the Creator, of all that is created. Say prayers and thanks every night and day, praying for the health and well-being of all people. In the 1970s, I was fortunate to find a book, or did it find me? That is an English translation of 16th century translation of an esoteric teaching, supposedly over 5,000 years old. A side note, I also pray for those who cause all the misery and suffering in the world as they need it more. I have studied healing modalities, such as Reiki, and for those who have just jumped in and screamed that it's the devil's work, you are sadly misguided. Every time I give healing, I pray to the Creator to protect the subject of the healing, and I recite the Lord's Prayer. I've seen the healing guides who have come in to assist with the healing patient. Understand, I do not do the healing. I am the conduit through which the healing flows from the Creator to the patient. I've also been taught shamanic practices to bring knowledge and healing. All my life, when I have had certain types of healing or knowledge going on, there is always a native person with me, either an American, Amazon, or Australian First Nations high person. I currently have 3 shamanic guides who have chosen to guide me. The first one to come was an Australian wedge-tailed eagle. The second to come was a large wolf from a snow-covered place. The third to come is an Australian Aboriginal medicine man. For some, quote, unknown for some unknown reason, one summer evening I went and opened our front door only to find there was a small snake about a foot long. It was a juvenile type called a dugit, in the top 10 of most venomous snakes. Juveniles are more venomous as they inject all their venom if they bite, rather than the adults who are able to regulate their venom. Now, not wanting to have a cat or a dog kill it, I decided to rescue it and release it into the bush at the end of the street in the morning. All I could grab was a clear plastic lunchbox, so snake into lunchbox. Sat down on the sofa to check it out, to make sure it wasn't injured. The whole time it was striking and hissing where my hands were on the box. I then had a, quote, feeling/message, end quote, to try giving it some Reiki. So with one hand under the box and the other on top, I commenced. Immediately it calmed down and curled up and seemed to go to sleep. Now, objectively, Was this because of the Reiki or because my hands were no longer on the sides of the box? I don't care. I know what happened. A lot of what I'm taught seems to be organized, but not in the ordinary sense. They seem to arrange things for me. One night, my wife and I were watching TV prior to going to bed. Suddenly, I jumped up and ran to our bedroom that was downstairs, ripped back the bed covers to reveal a large, venomous spider on the sheets. Be aware. Learn to listen to the little voices. I've called on the Creator to help somebody in crisis that I was unable to help. Each time the help to that person was instantaneous. There was a family member who was on the verge of taking their life by violent means. No matter what I said or did made no difference. Out of desperation, I just put my hands to my face and said softly, "God, please help him." And instantly the person calmed down and it was defused. Now this happened 2 more times. On the 3rd time, the person yelled out, "What are you doing?" while madly looking around his chair to see who was there. To me, this is proof that A, God helps, and B, people can feel God being there, though they may not know what it is. One of my searches for knowledge brought me to a group of people who study a very old esoteric teaching attributed to a time before Egypt became desert. The only stipulation was that the one had to believe in God. So they were Christians, Jews, Catholics, Muslims, etc., all together believing in God. The practice of this teaching was based on the questioning and proving everything for yourself. A couple of things I learned have application here to your page, Steve. Now, many ask why. How do the Sabe know when you're looking at them and they look straight back at you? It is an energy called attention. Yes, I know everybody loosely uses that term, but it is misuse of that term. Attention is an essential energy. Some actually acknowledge it as a physical energy. It is the way also that energy is transferred from one living thing to another. To discuss this fully would take another essay. Our body actually utilizes attention to keep itself functioning. So, for those misguided educators who say to a child, "Give me your undivided attention," if the child could actually do that, the body would die. I realize this may be getting out there, but this is all part of the basis of esoteric knowledge. Have you ever been in a crowd, etc., and suddenly turned to find someone is looking at you? They were knowingly or not putting their attention on you. This is an example of how I practice with my attention. I would get onto a crowded train station at peak hour, look down the platform quite some distance from me, pick out a person. I'd then look straight ahead so I could only see the subject with my peripheral vision. And then I sent my attention to them. They would turn and look at me through the crowd, usually with a quizzed look on their face. I did a lot of shooting here, so I get to practice this. I do a lot of shooting here, so I get to practice this. Looking through your scope, some tend to intensely focus on what is in the scope. Is the animal right for a good shot? Breathe, finger on trigger, excitement, etc., etc. If you find the target turning and looking at you, then you have given up your attention and they sensed you. Try looking through the scope in a more relaxed way. Move your attention away from your eyes and say onto your grip, be aware of what is in the scope rather than concentrating on it. I really feel the Sabe are finely tuned to pick up energies. Well, that's how they survive. So if you are concentrating on one through your scope, he reacts. But if you inadvertently surprise one, you weren't putting your attention on it. Your attention may have been on your path, where your next footfall was, etc. I practiced walking up on wild birds and animals, but keeping my awareness on myself and not allowing it to go onto them. If you get it right, mostly you can walk on past without them being disturbed. I probably made a dog's breakfast out of that, Steve, but I hope you got some understanding. I did. I can relate. Next one it time. What? Next one it time. Through my esoteric studies, one of the things that seems to have been affected is my relationship to time. I wear an analog watch, and started thinking there was something wrong with it because sometimes the second hand would not be moving. On occasion, I was driving down a winding road with a friend to go for a picnic. Someone asked what was the time, so as we were going around the next corner, I glanced at my watch. The second hand stopped moving. I had a sense that the car was still moving. When my watch started moving again, the second hand sprang forward 5 seconds and I was around the corner. I find a lot of times that I look at my watch or my clock with a second hand and the hand is not moving. Sorry, with a second hand and the hand is not moving. And a few seconds later it starts again. Recently I was asked by a friend for some help as he was being unfairly persecuted for something of a serious nature by an organization that we both belong to. We were to do this by phone conference with another of our mutual friends coming into my place to put our heads together to come up with an action plan. It was planned for 6 p.m. My mate arrived, pads and pens and legal paperwork at the ready. My mate and I went out onto my back patio as it was a hot night to do it all in relative comfort. Going into this, hold on. Got a creek washing off to the left. It's a jet going over top. I heard some weird noise come. Sorry. Going into this, I really had no idea how to proceed to help my friend. So, with in mind of how I called on the Creator to help my family member in crisis, as I walked the door to outside, I put my hands over my eyes, as usual, and prayed to the Creator to guide me to help my friend. Well, the meeting went okay. Many solutions came up. Goodbyes were done, and my friend who came over said he had better be going as his wife was unwell, and he asked what was the time. I looked at my watch. It was 6 p.m. I could see the kitchen clock where we were and saw that it was indeed 7 p.m. I said, must be something up with my watch. So, saw my mate to his car. I came back inside, looked at the kitchen clock again, then back at my watch. It was now the correct time. So 60 minutes of stop time. When my wife became ill, it was as if the whole thing was choreographed, but over 4 years. She just hung up the phone from her mom, had a stroke, and collapsed to the ground. The kids had a day off school, and one of our daughters just happened to run inside to get a drink from the fridge near the back window and saw Mom go down. She screamed out to her sister, studying for exams and who had just completed CPR as a part of a life-saving test. Sister came out, started CPR, while calling a neighbor who was a senior nurse, who called the paramedics who just happened to be a couple streets away going back to base. Wifey gets taken to emergency, and with a shitload of effort by dedicated nurses and doctors, she is alive, though in a coma. A few years now pass, and though back home she is not fully recovered, she is enjoying her family. Having another crisis, ends up back in emergency. Gave her evening meds, which also helped her go to sleep. Her best friend, the nurse neighbor, was on shift that night. When she heard, she came running over to see. And being so in touch, she said to me, as we looked at my wife asleep in the gurney, prefaced my next bit by stating my wife was extremely strong and only survived all this time by fighting all the way. Anyway, our friend suddenly exclaimed, "My God, Michelle, she's fighting it. If she wakes up from this, she will be in real trouble. You have to tell her it's okay to go now." When her friend said this, I immediately came back to my senses and saw my wife struggling through, though still out to it. Now I had to do the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I went over to my wife, held her hand, and told her that it was okay for her to go now. That we loved her and would miss her, but it was her time. It was okay. The doctor came in, took me aside, and said, "If you have family, get them here now, as she has only about 2 hours." All the kids came. We gathered around the bed in the ward where they moved her to. I told each of the kids they have to make their peace individually, and we would all come together again. She passed as we all came back into the room. I gave her a blessing from the Creator, then watched her soul leave the room. Sorry if this seemed irrelevant, but there were so many little lessons for me/us in being aware and attentive to what is going on around us. I've always believed that there are nature spirits who look after areas or creatures who can also help us if or when needed. One time we had a little food, I went fishing and remembered that I should ask for help. So out loud I said, "Spirits of this place, grant me food to feed my family." After that I cast my line, and in 3 casts in quick succession I pulled in 3 decent-sized fish, gave thanks, and took them home. Another time I was training along the beach sand dunes for a long trek, and I cut my hand on a shell. It was hot, I was sweating, and the flies were crazy. My hand wouldn't stop bleeding, and the flies were having a field day. As I was next to the surf, just then it came to me again to ask for help. So I turned and addressed the surf and said, "Spirits of the ocean, I asked for help to heal my hand." Within seconds, the bleeding stopped. I've learned to accept these things as they are. There is no gee whiz factor for me. It is what it is. My job, as I see it, is to keep collecting puzzle pieces, and one day I'll have enough pieces to make the picture and to pass on any/all knowledge for those who come after me. I do not know why we are limited in our abilities. I marvel at people who are skilled doctors, surgeons, nurses, builders, scientists, farmers, musicians, and people like yourself with the wonderful knowledge of the wilderness and what goes on there. People need to become aware of the world we have and ourselves first. Forget the rest. I'm just an ordinary old guy, public school educated, working parents, missed out on going to Vietnam. In short, nothing special. In closing, I will share this that just came to mind as an important stepping stone in my life. For many decades, I had pondered the questions of life. One day in my 40s, I was in a deep meditation asking, what is the answer? After a while, a being covered in gold descended to be right in front of me. He then asked, "Do you want the answer?" I replied, "Yes." Then he asked again, "Do you really want the answer?" Again I replied, "Yes." He just looked at me and said, "Love," smiled, and returned the way he came. Now stay with me. No, I've never used any funny herbs or spices. The instinctive message was love of self first. You cannot love and respect yourself first. You cannot truly love or respect others. And this is not the love of the latest car, latest iPhone, clothing, sex partner, etc. This isn't an easy path, but it's doable. Steve, much blessings, love and respect to you and Sarah, animals, to all the good folks listening in. Blessings on you all. It doesn't really matter if you don't understand everything for now. Just keep on going. Whatever the bad people's plans for us is, we do not have to accept it as our reality. We must not give up. Keep your vision of a good future in your mind. Kind regards, Mike, Perth, Australia. Mike, I appreciate you sharing your ride and your knowledge, your wisdom, your experiences. I absolutely appreciate it. I love hearing from our fellow community members who are older than average, older than me, older than average, and then sharing knowledge. I love that. That's who we're should be listening to, amongst each other always. But I think special attention should be to our elders of our communities, for sure. That was a long one. Went a little bit all over the map with a bunch of information, but I'm sure a lot of people are going to relate to it, and a lot aren't. And that is what it is, right? It is what it is. I'm going to get one more done. There's a ramp that goes up into the timber, and it looks impenetrable from here, and I'm curious to see how thick it is in here. And after I read this one last email, I'm going to take you guys up there. We're going to go see how thick it is on this coast. It's nasty ass shit, this timber. It is thick. Sorry for that. I'll get onto that in a second. Let's read this. Bigfoot story. Oh, this is Matt. Pretty sure I sent this first email to the wrong email address. If not, I'm sorry for sending it again. So here's my story. I've had a few weird things happen on my grandparents' property. That is in Wisconsin. I've been hunting there since I was 5 years old. My dad. I've been with my dad. And I think somebody might be here. Might be time to shut down the stories for a minute. All right, the gang's on the way back. So what I'm going to do right now I'm going to go up this ramp into this timber. I'm going to take you guys with me. I've never been up here. And we're going to see what the forest is like in here, alright? Let's go have a look. Ooh, slippery. Looks like there's an outhouse up here. And it doesn't look like this goes anywhere. Look at this nasty stuff. Could only imagine, oops, being somewhat shipwrecked trying to get through this, you know?